Hi class, in today's video we're going to be covering your first assignment for Management 5113. It's a project that I call How Will You Measure Your Life? And I borrow the name from the title of a Harvard Business Review article of the same name. I can tell you I've been teaching this course for about 5 years. Every year we've had this assignment, and without fail, when I get the course evaluations at the end of each semester, the thing that consistently is ranked as the high point of the class is the benefit that students get out of this assignment. So I hope that you will find it beneficial and even enjoyable. And I look forward to reading your assignments when you turn those in. So let's take a look at the slides. So my first question for you is this. If you were the CEO of a company called You Incorporated, and you were assigned to manage your life, that is, you were assigned to come up with a strategy for your life, how would you rate yourself on how well you're managing your life and your career? That's the essence of this assignment. I'll tell you that this assignment is a little bit awkward for some people because it's a project of self-examination, of self-assessment. And for some people that's uncomfortable because some of us have a hard time taking an objective look at ourselves, right? It's easier for us to objectively evaluate other people, but we have trouble looking inward. The other thing I find is that most of us seldom take the time to seriously examine ourselves, right? We're so busy with the day-to-day tasks of our already hectic lives that we don't make time for the things that Stephen Covey calls important but not urgent, right? And yet these are the very activities that often provide the best return on our time. So this project's going to tie together several topics from different chapters in your text, and the project will help you see how these different concepts fit together. We'll talk about our values that your textbook covers in chapters 2 and 14. We'll talk about goal setting that your textbook discusses in chapters 6 and 15. And we'll talk about the importance of having a mission. That subject's covered in chapter 16 of your text. Now, you don't have to have read all those chapters before you start this project. That's the good news, right? In fact, by completing this project, you'll actually have a better context when you read those chapters. But broadly speaking, this project pulls from different theories in both organizational behavior, this class, and from strategy, a class that you may have taken or you may still be on your plan of study for later. So the goal of this project is to start you on a journey towards working towards your personal sweet spot. Think about it. We all have certain activities that we're good at, right? There are certain activities that we enjoy. And there are certain activities that the world needs, that is, that people around the world benefit from. And where these three spheres overlap, it's what I refer to as your sweet spot. When you're operating in that area, that's where you're going to be the most productive and get the most satisfaction out of your work. Sometimes in sports, athletes or coaches refer to this as being in the zone when we operate in our sweet spot. Now, I always think it's good to start with the end in mind, so let's take a look at what your assignment's going to be. As part of this project, you're going to read the Harvard Business School article, How Will You Measure Your Life? You're going to watch a short video series called Trombone Player Wanted by Marcus Buckingham. You're then going to discover and document your personal values. That is, you're going to list 4 to 6 values, and then for each value write 1 to 3 sentences about why that value is important to you. You'll write a purpose statement, and then you'll determine your mission for the next 5 to 10 years. That is, what's that big, hairy, audacious goal that you want to accomplish in the next 5 to 10 years. You'll perform a personal SWOT analysis. You'll take a look at your own strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Then based on your vision, that is your values, purpose, and mission, and based on your personal strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, you'll develop a life strategy. And then finally, you'll decide how you're going to document and measure your progress towards your mission. So let's start with the Clayton Christensen article. One of the foundational resources for this project, as I mentioned, is this Harvard Business Review article by Christensen. And it came about because in the spring of 2010, the graduating class at Harvard Business School asked Christensen to address them, but not about how to apply his thinking to their careers, but rather how to apply their theories to their personal lives. His response was documented in a Harvard Business Review article that in 2010 won the McKinsey Award, which is given for the best Harvard Business Review article each year. The article was later expanded into a best-selling book that Forbes magazine called one of the surprisingly powerful books of personal philosophy in the 21st century. And I tell you this so you'll recognize up front that many people in several respected organizations have said that this is information worth knowing and applying. So a little bit about Christensen. He is a professor of business administration at Harvard Business School, and he teaches one of the more popular elective courses for second-year students there called Building and Sustaining a Successful Enterprise. Christensen received his bachelor's degree in economics, summa cum laude, from Brigham Young University. He has a master's in philosophy and applied econometrics from Oxford University, where he studied as a Rhodes Scholar. And he subsequently received an MBA with high distinction from Harvard Business School in 1979. If you know a little bit about Christensen, you may know that in 2011, in a poll of thousands of business executives, consultants, business school professors, Christensen was named as the most influential business thinker in the world. He's also a best-selling author of 9 books. He's written more than 100 different articles. You may know his first book, The Innovator's Dilemma, received the Global Business Book Award as the best business book of the year in 1997. And in 2011, The Economist magazine named it one of the 6 most important books about business ever written. He's actually a 5-time recipient of the McKinsey Award given for the best articles published in Business Review. And he's received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Tribeca Films Festival. So all to say, Christensen's just one of those people that when he speaks or writes, it's generally worth our time to listen closely. So in this article, Christensen talks about one of his own personal aha moments. You know, one of those moments where the light bulb comes on and everything becomes clear. Now, if you haven't read the article, this might be a good time to pause the video and go read the article, How We Measure Your Life. But let me ask you, what happened when Christensen visited Andy Grove at Intel? Do you remember? Grove, who was the chairman at Intel at the time, had invited Christensen to come to Intel and talk about his theory of disruptive innovation. But when Christensen got there, something had come up, and Grove said he could only give Christensen 10 minutes. So in the interest of time, Grove told Christensen that he understood the model of disruptive innovation, disruptive technology, but he wanted Christensen's opinion about how to apply it at Intel. But it was interesting that Christensen says that he resisted the temptation to prescribe a specific solution for Intel, and instead he gave an example of how the theory had worked at a steel company called Nucor. And Christensen goes on to say in the article that that experience had a profound experience on his life, and he actually believes that if he had given in to the temptation to prescribe a specific solution to Intel, it would not have been nearly as effective. So basically, instead of telling Andy Grove what to think, Christensen taught Grove how to think. And since then, Christensen has structured his teaching in that way, and this article follows the same format. What I'm attempting to do with this project that you're getting ready to work on is to apply that same approach. I'm not going to tell you what to do with your lives. I'm instead telling you how you can know what you should do. I'm going to take you through a series of steps that will allow you to understand the best strategy for your life. So in this article, Christensen teaches us how to apply several of these business theories to our personal lives. So at a high level, these are the things that Christensen talks about. He talks about creating a strategy for our lives. He talks about how we allocate our resources. He talks about creating a culture. We'll talk about that a little bit. He talks about avoiding the marginal cost mistakes and the danger of that. He underscores the importance of humility, and then he finishes up by talking about how we choose the right yardstick. So the first thing that Christensen discusses in the article is creating a strategy for our lives. And it's kind of sad, actually, But most people spend more time planning their vacations than they do planning their lives, right? But just like organizations, our personal strategies are determined by the types of activities that we invest in. That is, where do we invest in our time and where are we investing our money? In the article, Christian writes that he sees more and more of his former classmates coming back to reunions unhappy, they're divorced, they're alienated from their children. And what Christensen says is none of these people ever planned on those outcomes, right? They didn't go into their lives thinking, how can I screw up my family? But that's exactly the strategy they implemented by not having a specific purpose for their lives and keeping that purpose as their focus. And so we're going to try to help you avoid some of those risks by going through this process. The next thing that Christensen talks about is how we allocate our resources. Also, just like organizations, we each have a limited amount of time and talent, right? We all want to have successful careers. We want to have happy marriages. We want to raise great kids. We want to give back to our communities. The trouble is that there are more opportunities competing for our time and money than we have time and money, right? There are just more things pulling on us than we can possibly respond to. And Christensen points out something here important that I have found to be very true, and that is that people with a high need of achievement, and that includes people like you who are working on graduate level degrees, people with a high need for achievement tend to allocate their time to the activities that provide the most immediate and tangible return, right? We invest tons of time in things that we can immediately measure, like finishing a project or closing a sale. The trouble with that is that some of the most important things in our lives are the things that we won't be able to measure for years down the road. For example, we can neglect our relationship with our spouse or with our kids and not pay the penalty until years later. By the time we realize that we've underinvested in the things that matter most, it may be too late to fix them. So we have to be very conscious of how we're allocating our time and money, and also realize that some of the things that are most important may be inherently hard to measure. Here's some quick examples. We all know about the time value of money. Here's a quote at the bottom that I repeat often that says just basically there's a cumulative value to investing small amounts of time in certain activities over a long period of time. Conversely, there is an opportunity cost associated with not making those small investments. So you can basically take $100 a month and put it into a good mutual fund, and at the end of your career, you can have $1 million in your retirement fund. But I think the most recent statistics I read said that the average person has like $15,000 in retirement. It's horrible because we undervalue the importance of making small investments now. That's a financial example, but the same is true of our time. As you know or are figuring out, you can spend a few hours each week, and over a period of a couple years, you can finish with your master's degree, with a graduate degree, by spending a little bit of time very intentionally every week. The same is true of exercise. It doesn't take a lot of time to improve our health. 30 minutes a day, you can be in really good shape. Eat right and just do a little bit of exercise each week. And the trouble is we underinvest in those things because we don't get immediate results. Christensen also talks about a model in the article that he teaches called the Tools of Cooperation that basically just says that being an effective manager isn't as easy as it sounds. And he talks about the different tools that we use as managers to obtain cooperation for employees. And he arranges these different tools on two different axes to measure, first of all, the degree to which employees agree on the action, and secondly, the degree to which they agree on the outcomes that the actions will produce. And Christensen points out in the article that when there's little agreement on those two questions, that managers have to use what he calls power tools, things like coercion and threats and punishment, when the employees don't agree on the action and they don't agree on the outcome. You have to resort to these power tools. The trouble is sometimes the easiest tools for us as parents to use with our children are these same types of tools. But if we want our children to grow up healthy and well-balanced, we may have to rely on tools that may be more difficult to use, like persuasion and logic. The same is true of our interactions with our spouse. And these types of tools that we use contribute to the culture of our families, just like they contribute to the cultures of our organization. So it's important to think about the type of culture that we're creating based on the type of tools of cooperation that we're using. Christensen goes on to talk about the marginal cost mistake, and most of you know this from either your undergraduate studies or your MBA studies, that in business school we're taught that when we make an investment decision that we should generally ignore the fixed cost or the sunk cost and instead make the decision based on the marginal costs and the marginal revenues of each alternative, right? We've learned from our classes that we tend to be biased towards what we've put into place in the past. That is, if we've already sunk a bunch of money into something, we're hesitant to walk away from that. And in this article, Christensen argues that we make the same mistake in our lives when we tell ourselves that I know people generally shouldn't do this particular thing, this potentially unethical or immoral thing, but we rationalize that it'll be okay if I do it just this one time. That is, Christensen's telling us that the marginal cost of doing something wrong often seems alluringly low. That is, the justification for maybe cooking the books at work or dishonesty or having an affair lies in this marginal economics of when we say, I'm just going to do it just this once. Just this one time I'm going to take a little money out of petty cash. Just this one time I'm going to pad my expense report. Just this one time I'm going to be flirtatious with the person in the office next to me or the person on this business trip with me. But then Christensen goes on to say something that I think is pretty profound. And this is something that you may want to highlight or underscore, put it somewhere where you can see it. And that is, it's easier to hold on to your principles 100% of the time than it is 98% of the time. What do you think about that? You think that's true? Because what Christensen says is once we give in, we succumb to the temptation that it gets easier and easier to do it the next time. Something to think about. Christensen goes on to talk about the importance of humility. He says, for most of our early lives, we've been surrounded by people who, for the most part, were smarter than us, right? They have more education, they have more life experience, they had more career experience. But the trouble with that mindset is, as you promote within your companies and as you take more graduate level classes, you're going to be surrounded by fewer and fewer people who are actually smarter than you in a formal book learning kind of way. So if your attitude is such that you think only smarter people can teach you anything, you're going to have limited opportunities to learn. So Christensen encourages us to have a humble eagerness, what he calls a humble eagerness to learn something from everybody with whom we come into contact. And it reminded me of a guy that I met a couple years ago here on campus. He's the custodian for one of the buildings on campus, and I just got to talking to him about life and philosophies and that type of thing. And he is one of the most interesting people. I love talking to him. Very interesting guy, very deep thinker. But if I had said to myself, well, he's just a custodian, I'm a professor with a PhD, what could I possibly learn from him? Then I would have completely missed out on all of his insights, and I would have missed out on the relationship that I have with him now. So keep in mind, you can learn something from almost everyone. I ask you a question. You can ponder this. When's the last time you learned something from someone that surprised you because of the source? That is, you learned something valuable and you were taken back because it was maybe disproportionate in its value to how you would have evaluated that person's status in life. Something to think about. The last thing that Christensen reminds us of in this article is to measure our lives by the things that are really important. He says, ultimately, the only lasting legacy that we have is the investment that we make in people around us. That's the reason I went back and got a PhD late in life, so I could teach students like you, because I want to invest in your lives. I think that's the most important thing I can do. You know, as spouses, as parents, as managers, we have both the opportunity and the responsibility to help others be more than they might have been without our influence. I mean, that's an incredible opportunity. A great question to ask ourselves is, what do you want said at your funeral? You know, when you're 25 years old, that may seem like a goofy exercise because death seems so far away. And I don't mean to be morbid, but everyone in this class is going to die. It's going to happen. Let me give you an example here that put it in context for me. How many of you know who this is? This guy right here. It's actually Glenn Frey. Glenn Frey, who was a guitarist for the rock band, classic rock band, the Eagles. Maybe a little before your time. But I grew up on the music of the Eagles. The Eagles songs were basically the soundtrack of my life. And although I understood cognitively, you know, I understood in my head that Glenn Frey was 67 years old, in my mind, he was still, you know, a young rock star. So when he died a year or two ago from complications of surgery, it really caused me to pause and think again about, you know, we all have a limited amount of time on this earth. And what is the impact that I want to make? So that's basically wrapping up Clayton Christensen's article, How Will You Measure Your Life? So if you haven't read that article, make sure you go back and read that before you go forward with the rest of the video for this project. Make sure you understand the concepts in that, because you're going to be applying that in this project, and you will see some of those concepts again on the midterm exam.